It all started with a massacre. In the early hours of November 13th, 1974, Ronald DeFeo Jr. entered his family home, grabbed a rifle, and brutally murdered his parents and siblings while they slept. 6 bodies, deadly silence. When he was arrested, Ronald claimed that voices inside the house had forced him to do it. The house at 112 Ocean Avenue had been vacant for a year. Then the Lutz family moved in, and the real nightmare began. George and Kathy Lutz, along with their 3 children, believed they had found the perfect home. It was spacious, well located, and had an absurdly low price. On the first day, Father Mancuso came to bless the house. As he sprinkled holy water in the rooms, he felt a strange chill. As he entered the room where the DeFeo brothers had been killed, he heard a deep, cold voice whisper, "Get out of here." The priest said nothing to the family, but he fled without looking back. From then on, things began to get worse. In the second week, George began to wake up every night at exactly 3:15 a.m., the time the murders happened. He could feel something watching him. The doors slammed on their own. The pipes vibrated, emitting a sound like muffled screams. Dark spots appeared on the floor without explanation. And then came the worst. The flies. Even in winter, swarms of flies invaded the rooms on the second floor. Kathy cleaned them. They came back. One day, when she tried to kill them with a rag, she heard the same voice whisper behind her, "Get out of here." She turned around, and no one was there. In the third week, George realized that the house was changing him. He began to isolate himself, not eating, obsessing over the fireplace. He was always cold, even when the heater was on. Kathy would wake up with bruises all over her body. The children talked about a red-eyed girl who would appear at night. And then, the footprints began to appear. Hoof prints appeared in the snow outside the house, as if something inhuman was walking around there. On the last night, everything got out of control. Furniture moved by itself. Doors slammed violently. Screams echoed off the walls. And George saw 2 red orbs glowing in the darkness of the stairs. Something was there, something that didn't want them to leave. The red eyes blinked in the darkness. George Lutz froze. The glowing pupils seemed fixed on him, standing at the top of the stairs. An unbearable smell of sulfur and rotting flesh filled the air. Then the thing moved forward. George stumbled backward, feeling the heat of the fireplace behind him. Kathy screamed from upstairs, calling his name. The lights in the house began to flicker. The clock read 3:15 in the morning. It was always this time. The children began to scream. George ran to their room, his heart hammering in his chest. The windows were open, the cold wind blowing hard. But that wasn't what made him shiver. It was what stood in the corner of the room. A shadow too big to be human. Tall, hunched over with wide black hooves. Its eyes glowed in the darkness, and it laughed. The whole house shook. Kathy tried to grab her children and run to the front door, but it wouldn't open. None of the doors would open. None of the windows would break. They were trapped. George tried to kick the door, but felt something grab him. Invisible hands pulled him back, throwing him to the floor. He felt cold fingers wrap around his throat. The air began to run out. Kathy screamed. Furniture began to float around the room. The children cried as the walls bled. George used all his strength to stand up. He picked up a crucifix and began to pray out loud. "Our Father who art in heaven." The voices inside the house screamed in rage. The windows shattered at the same time. The front door flew open. And for a second, the world went silent. The thing was no longer there. The house let them go. George and Kathy fled that morning. They left everything behind. They never returned. A few weeks later, Ed and Lorraine Warren visited the house. Lorraine went upstairs, closed her eyes, and screamed. What she saw was described years later. It was pure evil, a demon from another world. He's still there. The case became one of the most famous in paranormal history. But the house? It's still there. And they say that if you walk down Ocean Avenue at 3:15 in the morning, you might see 2 red eyes watching you from the window. waiting for someone new to come in. It all started with a knock on the wall. Then came another, louder, until one night, the Hodgson family woke up to a loud bang. The two sisters, Janet and Margaret, ran to their mother's room, shaking. The wardrobe had moved by itself, crossing the room without anyone touching it. That was just the beginning. Peggy Hodgson was a single mother, raising 4 children in a modest house in the suburbs of London. The house was small, simple, and unremarkable, but something was wrong. The noise inside the walls grew louder and louder. Sometimes it sounded like banging, other times like muffled whispers. One night, Peggy walked into the girls' room and saw the chairs moving by themselves. The lights flickered for no reason, and then the toys started flying through the air. Fear gripped the family, but no one believed them, until a neighbor heard the sounds, and then a police officer. In September 1977, the police were called. A female officer entered the house, observing everything skeptically. Nothing seemed wrong, until a chair moved on its own. It slid across the floor before her eyes, with no one around. She couldn't explain it, but she ran away and never came back. That's when the press got wind of the case, and the Warrens were called. The paranormal activity escalated night by night. 11-year-old Janet began speaking in a deep, hoarse voice completely unlike her own. "This is my house. Get out." The family found her levitating in the bedroom, her eyes white, her body rigid. Peggy screamed, but Janet didn't respond. And then she fell. The house shook. The windows opened by themselves. Janet's voice changed. "My name is Bill Wilkins." The mother froze. Bill Wilkins had been the previous owner of the house, and he had died there. The voice that came out of Janet's mouth wasn't hers. It was thick, hoarse, and filled with hate. "My name is Bill Wilkins." Her mother, Peggy, felt a chill. Bill Wilkins. That name was real. The former resident of the house, the man who died there. But Janet couldn't know that. The paranormal activity intensified. Janet said she couldn't control what was happening. But when night fell, impossible things happened. Beds shook. Doors slammed shut on their own. Objects disappeared and reappeared in impossible places. And then the shadows began to move. Peggy woke up one night to a figure standing in the doorway. It wasn't Janet. It wasn't anyone in the family. It was something else. And it was smiling. The Warrens arrived at the house in late 1977. Lorraine walked into the living room and turned pale. "There's something terrible here." That night they set up cameras and recorders. They needed evidence. Janet was placed in her room, watched. Everything was silent, until a sound echoed through the house, a hoarse laugh. The cameras shook. A chair flew against the wall. And then Janet disappeared. They found her downstairs. Levitation. She didn't know how she got there. She didn't remember anything. But in the back of the room, a recorder recorded one last sentence. "This is my house." It was Bill Wilkins' voice, but Bill had been dead for years. After the Warrens' investigation, the phenomena began to diminish. Janet grew up and claimed that she didn't remember most of the things that happened. But one thing was certain. The Enfield poltergeist was real, and evil still lurked in that house. Maurice Theriault was no ordinary man. Ever since he was a child, he said he felt something inside him, something that made him act without control, something that whispered words in his mind that he didn't understand. His father, a cruel man, didn't believe in any of this. He would lock the boy in the dark barn for hours, sometimes days. That's when Maurice began to change, and that's when the devil entered. Decades later, Maurice was a strong man, a simple farmer. But inside him, there was something broken. His wife noticed strange things. Sometimes he seemed absent, distant. Other times, he spoke words in Latin, even though he had never learned the language. Then came the episodes of violence. His face would change, his voice deeper, his eyes black. And then, the blood began to appear. First, drops running down his hands, then cuts appearing on his skin without explanation. He said he felt no pain, but the worst part was yet to come. One night, Maurice felt an unbearable heat. His skin burned, as if something was trying to escape from inside him. He ran to the bathroom mirror and saw another face above his, a dark, distorted face, smiling. The eyes were not human. His wife came into the bathroom and screamed. Behind Maurice, the reflection was laughing, but Maurice did not move. He just looked at his wife and said, in a voice that was not his own, "It's time." She fled the house, and that same night, Ed and Lorraine Warren received a phone call. Maurice Thériault needed an exorcism, and maybe it was already too late. The voice on the phone was urgent. There was something inside Maurice. Ed and Lorraine Warren arrived at the farmhouse the next morning. The air was heavy. The smell of sulfur permeated the house. Lorraine, a sensitive, felt a presence immediately. "There's something here," she whispered. "Something that won't leave." Maurice was in the kitchen, sitting, pale, sweating cold. "He's not my husband anymore," his wife whispered. He's not him." Ed opened the Bible. The moment he began to pray, Maurice laughed, but it wasn't his laugh. It was a grotesque voice, layered over his own. Two voices coming from the same mouth. "He's mine." The room went dark. The windows creaked by themselves. Maurice's body stiffened. His eyes rolled back, leaving only the whites visible. "I am Lucifer." The voice didn't come from his mouth. It came from the walls. The exorcism began. Ed Warren pressed a crucifix to Maurice's forehead. His skin burned instantly. Claw marks appeared on his chest, as if something was clawing at him from the inside. Maurice screamed, but his mouth wouldn't move. "He's not coming out." Lorraine felt an invisible force push her back. The floor shook, and then blood began to flow. Maurice opened his eyes and red tears streamed down his face. The priests continued their prayer. The room grew colder, and then Maurice stopped breathing. Absolute silence. His body fell to the floor. Lorraine approached, hesitantly. He was alive, but different. The man opened his eyes and they were clear again. The demon was gone, but Lorraine felt a chill. Something wasn't right. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the mirror behind her, and in the reflection, the dark face was still there, smiling. Union Cemetery in Easton, Connecticut, is one of the most haunted places in the United States. Legends tell of a woman dressed in white who appears on the road and disappears in front of drivers. Some say she approaches cars, looking directly into the eyes of the occupants before disappearing into the darkness. Others tell of unexplained noises, whispers in the wind, and shadows moving between the tombstones. I didn't believe these stories until that night. It was autumn 1990. Two friends, Chris and Daniel, and I decided to go to the cemetery after midnight. We wanted to prove that it was all just an exaggeration. We climbed over the rusty fence and walked among the old tombstones, lit only by a dim flashlight. The smell of damp earth and dry leaves was strong in the air. The silence inside was not normal. It wasn't the peaceful silence of the night. It was something heavier. The temperature suddenly dropped. Chris laughed and said, "White lady, where are you?" And then we heard it. Footsteps on the ground. We stood still. The flashlight began to flicker. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it. There was no one but us. But the footsteps kept going, and they were getting closer. At the edge of our vision, a white mist began to form between the graves. "This isn't normal," I muttered. The mist moved. It took shape, and then she appeared. The white lady. Her long dress seemed to float above the ground, without touching the earth. Her pale face and dark hair covered part of her blank expression. She wasn't walking. She was gliding. Daniel tried to light a lighter, but his fingers were shaking too much. Chris couldn't move. Then she lifted her face, and we realized she had no eyes, just black, deep, empty holes. The flashlight failed completely. The icy wind blew hard, even though the night had been completely still before. I wanted to run, but my body didn't respond. Then the white lady took a step towards us. The ground seemed to shake. Chris tried to scream, but no sound came out of his mouth. The woman raised one of her arms. Her fingers were long and pale, and then everything went dark. The last sound I heard was a whisper, "Help me." The whispered, "Help me," was still echoing in my ears. My body was frozen. The white lady was right in front of me. The black holes where her eyes should have been seemed to pull everything around her. The air grew heavy. My chest burned as if I were trying to breathe underwater. Chris and Daniel were frozen, but their eyes were wide with terror. Then she moved. She didn't walk. She floated. Her feet never touched the ground. And when she raised her hand, a cold wind hit us. The headstones around us began to shake, and then I was thrown backwards. I landed on the cold, damp ground. Pain shot through my spine, but I didn't have time to react. Chris fell beside me, hitting his head against a headstone. He groaned, dazed. Daniel was on his knees trying to get up, but the white lady was now right in front of him. "Daniel, run!" I screamed. He tried, but he couldn't move. The entity's pale face leaned over him. Its mouth began to open, more and more, far beyond what a human could. And then she screamed. The sound wasn't human. It wasn't a scream of despair. It was something deep, distorted, like several voices were screaming at once. Pain exploded inside my head. My skull felt like it was going to crack. The tombstones shuddered. The wind swirled around us. The trees bent as if they were fleeing. And then I saw it. The white lady's veil lifted for a second, and behind her, there were faces, dozens of faces, all pale, all screaming, trapped in it. Daniel finally managed to move. He fell onto his back and crawled away. Chris tugged on my shirt, forcing me to stand up. "Let's go!" We ran, across the graves, past the cracked headstones. The wind seemed to pull us back, but we didn't look back. We jumped over the rusty fence and fell onto the road. And then, silence. I looked back, my heart pounding. The white lady was no longer there, but the mist was still there, and in the middle of it, two black orbs watched us. The next morning, Chris researched the legend further. What we discovered was even worse than we imagined. The white lady was not just an ordinary spirit. They said she was a woman betrayed and murdered by her own husband. And now, her soul wandered the cemetery, trapped among the dead. But some stories said something different, that she wasn't just any spirit. She was a guardian, trapping something much worse inside the cemetery. And that night, we almost let her escape. The Perron family's nightmare began the day they moved in. It was the winter of 1971, when Roger and Carolyn Perron, along with their 5 daughters, arrived at their new home in Harrisville, Rhode Island. The farmhouse was old but spacious. It seemed perfect, but something was wrong. From day one, the signs began, and in this house, evil was already waiting. At first, things were subtle. Doors would open and close by themselves. Objects would disappear and reappear in impossible places. Carolyn's daughters began to notice a strange smell in the air, the aroma of rotting meat. And then, the voices came, whispers in the night, calls coming from the dark basement. Lights would flicker, windows would lock by themselves, but nothing was worse than the nighttime visits. The first to notice was Andrea, the oldest daughter. She woke up with a weight on her chest. She felt like something was watching her. She looked to the corner of the room and saw a woman standing there, tall, thin, wearing a dirty brown dress, with her head tilted to the side. Her eyes were black. Andrea tried to scream, but the thing put a finger to her lips, and then it disappeared. Carolyn, the mother, began to feel tired all the time. One night, she woke up to an unbearable smell of decay. She tried to get up, but something held her down. And then, she felt it. Nails scratching her legs, teeth biting her skin. Carolyn screamed. Roger ran to the room and found deep marks all over her body, but there was no one there, and in the corner of the room, the shadows seemed to move by themselves. Each night, the presence grew stronger. The daughters woke up with bruises all over their bodies. The smell of death permeated the walls. And one night, Carolyn heard a name, a faint whisper, echoing through the dark hallway. Bathsheba, the name of a woman who had lived in that house over 100 years ago, a woman accused of witchcraft and sacrifice, and who now wanted her home back. The house no longer belonged to the parent family. It belonged to Bathsheba. Carolyn felt it every night. Something was eating her up. The smell of rotting flesh wouldn't go away. The shadows in the house grew thicker, and then, one night, she stopped fighting. That's when Bathsheba took control. The daughters woke up to screams echoing through the house. Roger ran into the bedroom and found Carolyn levitating above the bed. Her eyes were open, but they weren't hers. Her mouth moved, but it wasn't her voice that came out. It was a garbled whisper, a language no one understood. The girls cried. Andrea held her younger sisters, trying to push them away, but Carolyn turned her face toward them and smiled. Roger tried to hold on to his wife, but was thrown against the wall by an invisible force. Carolyn writhed in midair. Her arms were stiff, her hands clenched like claws. Then she fell to the floor. For a moment, silence reigned. Then she opened her eyes again. "She's inside me," she whispered, and passed out. The next morning, Roger had no choice. He called the only people who could help them, Ed and Lorraine Warren. When Lorraine walked into the house, she felt an immediate chill. "There's something very powerful here," she whispered. "Something that won't go away." She walked up the stairs, her eyes fixed on the dark hallway. Then she stopped. She stared at the wall and murmured a name. "Bathsheba." Roger froze. Lorraine turned to him. She never left. Ed Warren asked for Carolyn to be brought into the living room. She looked thinner, paler, her eyes sunken. Lorraine took her hand and closed her eyes, and she saw it. The past. Bathsheba Sherman, standing in the same spot, more than a century before. She was a cold woman, with a cruel look in her eyes. They said she sacrificed children to a demon, and in that vision, Lorraine saw the exact moment of her death. Bathsheba was hanging from a tree, her neck broken, her eyes glazed over. But before she died, she cursed the house and swore that no one would live there in peace. Lorraine let go of Carolyn's hand, catching her breath. "She wants to kill them," she whispered. Ed and the priests began the ritual. Carolyn trembled. Her breathing became ragged. Then she began to laugh, a thick, distorted laugh. The air in the house grew thick. The lights flickered violently. And then Carolyn screamed. The exorcism lasted for hours. With each prayer, the furniture shook. The windows vibrated. The smell of rotting flesh intensified. And then, a deafening scream filled the house. Carolyn fell to the floor, powerless, and silence filled the room. Lorraine looked around. The evil had not disappeared, but it had retreated, for now. After that night, the Perron family had no more peace. The house still did not want them there. A year later, they were gone forever, but they say that if anyone passes by the farm, they will see a shadow in the window, watching, waiting, because Bathsheba is still there. The first time I heard the broadcast, I thought it was static. It was late at night, and I was driving alone on Interstate 49, cutting through Arkansas toward Texas. The car radio was on, but no station was tuned in. Just that monotonous hiss that fills the silence of a solo driver. The sky was dark, moonless, and the deserted road seemed to stretch on forever. My gas tank was half empty, and I still had a few hours until my next stop. That's when it happened. The static on the radio changed. At first, I thought it was interference, but then a sound came, a whisper, faint, drawn out, as if it were coming from far, far away. My chest tightened. I turned the radio knob, trying to adjust the signal, but the voice continued, slowly growing louder. "Help, please, someone, Find me. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. I glanced quickly at the radio's digital display. It showed no frequency, just a blinking number, 333.3. That didn't make sense. There was no radio station on that frequency. A shiver ran down my spine. The voice continued, "I'm here. Please, hear me." It was a woman. Her voice was broken, as if the transmission was being pulled and dragged by the wind. I slowed the car. My heart was pounding. I was in the middle of nowhere. There were no nearby towns, no radio towers that I could tell. So where was this coming from? The static grew louder, and then the voice screamed, "Don't look back." My blood ran cold. My first instinct was exactly that, to look in the rearview mirror. And that's when I saw it. In the darkness of the road, something stood on the shoulder of the road, illuminated only by the dim glow of my car's taillights. A silhouette, tall, thin, motionless. I couldn't make out its face, just its distorted shape and long arms hanging at its sides. My breath caught in my throat, and then the radio cut to absolute silence. The car seemed to have grown colder, the air around me heavier. I stepped on the gas. The silhouette disappeared in the rearview mirror as I picked up speed. But I could feel it. It was still there, watching me, chasing me. I looked back at the radio display. Now it showed only one word: lost. I drove on for several miles, trying to ignore the feeling that something was wrong. The radio remained silent. My hands were sweating on the steering wheel, and I needed a gas station, a town, anything that would make me feel less alone on this endless road. Finally, I saw a sign ahead, indicating a small gas station 2 miles away. I breathed a sigh of relief, but then the radio turned on by itself. The static returned, intense, almost deafening. And then, the voice came. This time, it wasn't a whisper. It was a scream. "He's on the road!" My nerves exploded. My eyes darted to the mirrors, to the corners of the road, hoping to see something, anything. And then, I saw it. Right in the middle of the road ahead, standing in the dim light of a lone street lamp, was a man. No, not really a man. He was too tall, too thin. His arms hung at his sides unnaturally, as if they had no bones. His face, it wasn't there. It was just a smooth, dark surface, like a solid shadow. My feet instinctively slammed on the brakes, but I was going too fast. The car slid across the wet asphalt, and I tried to swerve. The tires screamed against the ground. The thing didn't even move. For a second, I thought I was going to run him over, but when my car passed where he was, there was only emptiness. Nothing. The engine coughed, sputtered, and died. Silence fell over everything. My fingers trembled as I turned the key in the ignition, trying to start the car again. Nothing. Then the radio crackled. The voice came back. "He's closer now." My eyes widened. The rearview mirror. I didn't want to look, but I did. And there he was, the still silhouette, outside the passenger window. My breath caught. Then the streetlight flickered, and he was gone. The engine roared to life on its own. I didn't think twice. I stepped on the gas and sped away, leaving the road behind. But I knew it wasn't over. I could still hear the whispers on the radio, and I knew that somewhere in the darkness, he was still following me. My fingers tightened on the steering wheel as if my life depended on it. Maybe it did. The car was hurtling down the dark highway, the speedometer reading well above the speed limit. But I didn't dare slow down. The radio was still crackling. I wanted to turn it off, but something told me that if I did, the thing on the road would catch up with me. With every mile I drove, the feeling that I wasn't alone grew stronger. My back was clammy with cold sweat, and my heart was pounding like a drum inside my chest. The gas station appeared on the horizon like a beacon in the darkness. Small, lonely, with a sign flashing intermittently. The name, Last Stop Gas. The name made me swallow hard. I slowed down and parked next to a gas pump. The engine was still humming softly, as if it was as eager as I was to get going. but I needed a moment. I closed my eyes, trying to catch my breath. That's when I realized it. The radio was dead. I opened my eyes quickly. The dashboard display now showed a message that shouldn't have been there. He's gone. My spine froze. I looked around. The road behind me was empty. No silhouettes, no shadows. But something was wrong. The air was thick, as if the night itself was holding its breath. I stepped out of the car with hesitant steps. The ground was damp beneath my feet, even though it hadn't rained. The gas station convenience store was open, fluorescent lights flickering inside. I walked up to the entrance, the doorbell jingling in an oddly muffled tone. The place was empty, no clerks behind the counter, no customers at the shelves. There was only an old radio sitting on the counter, and it was on. The same static, the same hiss. My stomach churned. Slowly, I moved closer. The sound grew louder, and then the voice came back. He's here. My breath hitched. The mirror next to the shelf reflected something behind me. I didn't want to look, but my eyes were drawn to it. And then I saw it. The thing was standing in the middle of the store. It wasn't a shadow. It wasn't a man. It was something wrong. Too tall, too thin, as if it had been stretched by forces that didn't belong in this world. Its skin looked dark and wet, and its face, it wasn't a face, just a void, a space where a face should be. The radio crackled again. The voice grew fainter. "Run!" I turned so fast I almost tripped. My feet slipped on the floor. My hands smacked against a shelf full of snacks that spilled across the floor. The thing moved, but not in the way it was supposed to. It was as if the space around it was bending, as if time didn't apply to it. Before I could reach the door, the lights flickered. Everything went black. The radio went silent. Then came the noise, the sound of something scraping on the floor. My body froze. I could feel it getting closer. Then a dim light flickered for a moment, and I saw something worse. In the reflection of the store's glass window, I was still there, but my mouth was open, as if I were screaming. But I wasn't screaming. My heart almost stopped, and then it all started again. The radio crackled again. The voice came back, but this time, she wasn't asking for help. She was laughing, and behind me, the thing laughed too, but it wasn't a human sound. It was the sound of something that shouldn't exist. I ran without looking back. The store door slammed shut as I stepped out, and I stumbled as I reached my car. My hands shook as I tried to open the door, my eyes watering with sheer panic. Behind me, the radio was still blaring. The car's engine finally started, and I stepped on the gas. The gas station was behind me, but I knew it wasn't over. In the rearview mirror, the radio still showed a message. Frequency updated, and then the radio turned on by itself, and a new voice whispered, "Now, you're the one who's lost." I've never liked elevators. I've always preferred the stairs, even if it meant climbing several floors. Something about those cramped metal boxes always made me uncomfortable. The eerie silence, the faint creaking of the cables, the idea of being trapped between floors with no real way out. But that night, I had no choice, and it was the worst decision of my life. I had just gotten off work, exhausted after an overtime shift that seemed to never end. The building was practically empty, except for the security guard at the front desk, who was no longer paying attention to the cameras. I grabbed my bag, slung it over my shoulder, and headed for the elevator. The clock on the wall read 11:43 p.m. I would normally have taken the stairs, but my office was on the 15th floor, and my energy was already drained. So I pressed the button and waited. The digital display above the door showed the floors slowly descending. 8, 6, 3, 1. With a ding, the doors opened. The interior looked normal. Cold fluorescent lights illuminated the small space, the mirrors reflecting my tired expression. I sighed, stepped inside, and pressed the button for the ground floor. The doors closed. The elevator began its descent. 14, 13, 12. Then, something happened. The number 11 blinked, and the elevator stopped. There was absolute silence. I frowned, waiting for the doors to open, but nothing happened. The digital display blinked for a moment, and then something that made me freeze. The ground floor button went out, and a new button appeared, a button that had never been there before. Basement -2. I didn't know what that meant. The building only had one basement, where the garage was. There was no basement -2. My skin crawled. I thought about pressing another button, but before I could react, the elevator moved on its own, and it wasn't going down slowly. The cabin was plummeting at high speed. My stomach churned, and I held on to the sidebars as the sound of cables whirred around me. My ears popped from the pressure. The panel flashed chaotically, the numbers jumbled, and then everything stopped. The impact threw me against the wall of the elevator. The silence was so sudden that my ears rang. The lights flickered. The number on the panel now showed only one thing: -2. I swallowed hard. The elevator had stopped, but the doors didn't open. I stood there, waiting, trying to understand what was happening. My chest was rising and falling rapidly, and my mind was screaming at me not to leave. But then, I heard a sound, something scraping outside. My muscles locked. The noise was low, uneven, like fingernails scraping against metal. And then, the sound changed. Now it sounded like something was breathing right behind the doors. Every cell in my body was telling me not to move. But then the elevator lights went out completely. For a split second, I was in complete darkness. When they came back on, the doors were open. And what did I see? It wasn't the building's parking garage. It was a long, narrow hallway, lit by dim bulbs that flickered as if they were about to burn out. The floor was stained concrete, and the walls looked old, weathered. A strange smell filled the elevator, a smell of wet earth and something rotting. I pressed the buttons on the panel, trying to make the elevator go back up. No response. The hallway in front of me remained silent, with no signs of life. And then, something moved in the background, a shadow, too fast for me to see clearly. My heart raced. The voice inside my head said, "Don't get out of this elevator." But when I tried to press the emergency button, something even worse happened. The elevator disappeared. It didn't really disappear, but when I turned back, where the cabin should have been, there was only a concrete wall. There was no elevator anymore. I was trapped there, alone. Or at least, that's what I wanted to believe, because the sound of breathing came back, and this time, it was coming from the end of the hallway. Low, wet, wrong. I swallowed hard. Something was there with me, and no matter what it was, he knew I had arrived. The elevator door closed behind me with a sharp click. My heart was still pounding in my chest, cold sweat trickling down the back of my neck. The elevator began to rise slowly, but I could still feel that something was wrong. The digital display was blinking erratically, the numbers changing randomly. 2, 15, 3, 7, 1. As if I was stuck in a cycle that made no sense. I didn't know where I was going. Then the elevator came to an abrupt halt. The shock threw me against the wall of the cabin. The lights flickered, and the ground floor button went out. Before I could react, the radio built into the panel crackled, emitting a low interference. Then the voice came. "You should never have come in." My muscles tensed. It was the same voice as the man in the gray suit. My breath came in short pants. The elevator doors slowly opened, but what was on the other side was not the lobby of the building. It was a cemetery. A thick fog covered the ground. The tombstones were covered in moss, some broken, others tilted the wrong way, as if something had come out of there. My body refused to move. This was not possible. This could not be real. Then, something moved among the graves. Shadows crept in the fog, as if something was crawling under the ground. And then I saw it, a nearby tombstone, larger than the others, with a name engraved on it. My name. My legs almost gave out. The date of death. Today. "It's time." The voice came from the elevator. I turned and saw the man in the gray suit inside the cabin, now looking directly at me. He smiled. and without warning, he began to transform. The suit dissolved into something dark and sticky, like liquid shadow. His eyes became two empty sockets. His arms lengthened, his fingers tapering into claws. "You've gone too low." My feet reacted before my mind could. I ran between the graves, feeling the ground give way beneath my footsteps. Something was chasing me, the sound of claws scratching the headstones. My only way out was the elevator, but when I looked back, he wasn't there anymore. There was only more fog, and then the floor opened up. I fell into an endless void, spinning in darkness. My memories began to fade, my thoughts dissolved. I didn't know who I was anymore. I didn't know how long I had been falling, but suddenly, the elevator doors opened. The noise of the building's lobby filled my ears. The sound of keyboards, footsteps, conversations in the background. I was back. I staggered out of the elevator, my legs weak. Everything seemed normal, but then I realized no one was looking at me, no one saw me. I ran to the reception, tried to scream, tried to touch the security guard, but my hand went straight through his body. My blood ran cold. Then I looked at the large mirror on the wall. There was no reflection. That's when the elevator dinged behind me. The doors opened again, and there inside, standing with a pale smile, was the man in the gray suit. He raised a hand and gestured for me to enter. "Shall we go down again?" The door closed, and I finally understood. I would never leave there again. I've never been one to believe in curses. I always thought that these stories of haunted houses and cursed objects were exaggerations to scare tourists or fuel urban legends. But that night, everything changed. It all started with a bet. Ryan, Ashley, and Derek were traveling through the Louisiana countryside when we came across the Holloway Mansion, an old, abandoned building in the middle of a dense forest. The place looked like something out of a nightmare. Tall, dark windows, moss-covered bricks, and a rusty iron gate that creaked at the slightest touch. Local lore said that decades ago, the Holloway family disappeared inside that house after a night of games. No bodies were found, no trace of what happened, just a game board left on the table, as if someone was about to make their final move. "I bet no one here has the courage to go in," Ryan teased, a smug smile on his face. I didn't want to, but I've never known how to say no to a challenge either. The gate creaked open with an agonizing squeak, and we walked along the leaf-strewn path to the mansion's entrance. The door was unlocked. The interior was dark and quiet, the air heavy with the smell of rotting wood and dust. Our flashlights illuminated the linen-covered furniture and the crooked paintings on the walls, depicting faces whose eyes seemed to follow us. And then we saw it. In the center of the main room, on an old table, sat a game board. But it was no ordinary board. The pieces were neatly arranged, as if someone had just interrupted a game. The dice sat in the middle of the board, ready to be rolled, and at the top, an inscription engraved in gold letters gleamed in the light of our flashlights. "Play for your life." "This is amazing," Derek whispered, pulling up a chair. "It's just a game," Ashley said, picking up a piece. My spine tingled. "We shouldn't touch that." But Ryan was already picking up the dice. "Relax, man. It's just a game." He rolled the dice, and the board lit up on its own. The air in the room grew heavy, as if something invisible had been awakened. The chandelier swayed slightly above us, and then, without anyone touching it, the first pawn moved on its own. The game had begun, and now we couldn't stop. The first challenge. The letters on the board glowed, forming words that hadn't been there before. The door closes, the game begins. One wrong move, and you'll never leave again. The floor shook slightly. The door to the mansion slammed shut, and all the lanterns went out at once. The silence was overwhelming. Then, a faint light appeared on the board, revealing the next move. Ashley picked up the dice with shaking hands. This is some kind of trick, right?" Derek swallowed. "There's only one way to find out." He rolled. The pieces on the board moved on their own, and the following message appeared in the center. Choose a door. One will lead to salvation, the other to nothingness. A click sounded. Two doors that hadn't been there before appeared at the back of the room. They were both identical, dark wood with gold handles. Ryan laughed nervously. This has to be a trick, but I knew it. I knew it wasn't. The board glowed again. If you don't choose, the game will choose for you. The chandelier flickered, and behind us, something moved in the darkness. Time was running out, and now there was only one choice. The light from the board pulsed like a dark heart. Two doors. One would lead to salvation, the other to nothing. No one moved. Fear kept us frozen, our eyes flickering between the identical doors and the glowing board. Then we heard it. Behind us, a low, wet sound. Something was dragging itself across the wooden floor. I turned slowly. In the darkness of the room, a tall, shapeless shadow appeared. Its arms stretched out, its fingers slender and brushing the floor. It had no face, just a void where its eyes should be. The thing saw us. Ryan swallowed hard. We need to get out of here, now. Ashley was the first to act. She ran to one of the doors and grabbed the handle. The board screamed. The sound was deafening, as if 1,000 voices had screamed at once. The door Ashley had chosen disappeared before our eyes. A second later, she too was gone. There was no scream. There was no sound. She was simply gone. I froze. Ryan ran over to where Ashley stood and touched the empty space. His face went pale. She's gone. The board flashed again. One wrong choice. Game continues. The air grew heavy. The thing in the darkness took a step forward. Let's get out of here, Derek shouted, grabbing my shirt and pulling me toward the only remaining door. With no other option, we ran. The door creaked open, revealing a new room. But it wasn't the exit. It was another part of the game. The second challenge. The room was huge, with a dark marble floor and worn columns that looked like they were about to collapse. In the center was a giant chessboard, and then more words appeared in the air. To advance, move like pieces in the game. One wrong step, and you will not have another chance. Derek ran a hand over his face. This can't be happening. Ryan looked at the floor, trying to make sense of the rules. If it's like a chessboard, maybe we can only move according to the pieces. The shadow in the previous room moved. It couldn't go in there yet, but time was running out. I'll go first, Ryan said. He stepped forward, mimicking the movement of a chess knight. Nothing happened. Derek followed, moving like a bishop. I took a deep breath and mimicked a pawn. The board glowed. We were doing it right. We followed the rules, moving cautiously. Each step brought us closer to a door at the end of the room. But Ryan missed the move, and then the floor beneath him opened up. He tried to hold on, but something pulled him down. I'll never forget the look on his face as he disappeared into the abyss. He didn't scream. He just disappeared. The board glowed. One wrong choice. Game continues. My lungs were on fire. Derek and I made our way to the last safe space. The door was inches away. Go, he yelled, pushing me first. I stepped through the door, and then I heard the sound of the board. He missed. I turned in time to see the void swallow Derek. The door slammed shut, and then I was alone. The last move. The environment around me changed. Now I was back in the first room. The board glowed on the table, waiting for my final move. But now, there was only one piece in the game. Mine. The voice echoed around me. Play. My fingers trembled as I held the dice. I rolled. The numbers flashed. The board shook. The chandelier shook violently. The entire room began to crumble. And then, the last message appeared. The game ends with a sole survivor. The sound exploded in my ears. The mansion crumbled around me. The air was knocked from my lungs. And then, nothing. Absolute silence. The exit. Or not. I woke up outside the mansion. The sun was already rising. My eyes were heavy, my skin stained with dust and sweat. The mansion was no longer there. The place where it once stood was just an empty lot. I stood up, my mind in a haze, and then I realized my friends were not there. There was no sign of them, no footprints, no clue that they had ever existed. My chest tightened. I went back to town, looked for them, called their cell phones. Nothing. No one remembered them, not even their families. It was as if they had never existed. But I knew the truth, and one thing haunts me to this day. Every night, around 3:33 a.m., a mysterious package appears at my door. Inside, there is always a new board and a single instruction. The game continues. I swear that town existed. It wasn't a vague memory, a distant dream, or a poorly told story. I grew up there. I walked its streets, went to school, played soccer in the Central Park. I knew every alley, every store, every house with peeling paint on the porch. And then, one day, it just disappeared. I'm not talking about something symbolic, like urban changes or gradual abandonment. I'm saying it never existed. The return. My name is Jake, and it all started when I came home after years away. I had left my hometown of Willow Creek when I was 18, right after my parents died in a car accident. I never had a reason to go back. But then, I received a letter. Yes, a letter. In the 21st century. The envelope had no return address, just my name written in a handwriting that seemed strangely familiar to me. Inside, a single sentence. You need to come back before it's too late. Below the sentence, a date. Today. I shivered when I read it. I hadn't spoken to anyone in town in years. Who had sent me this? And too late for what? Curiosity got the better of me. I got in my car and drove for hours to where Willow Creek was supposed to be. But when I got there was nothing. Nothing but dense forest and a dirt road that ended in the middle of nowhere. I slammed on the brakes, my heart racing. I looked at the GPS. The screen showed a large empty space with no name, no registered roads. That didn't make sense. I got out of the car, the cold wind biting my skin. I walked to where there should have been a gas station at the entrance to town, but there were only trees. My chest tightened. Willow Creek was gone. Or worse, Willow Creek never existed. The broken memories. I stood there trying to process what I was seeing. I picked up my phone and called Derek, my childhood best friend. Hello? His voice sounded hesitant. Derek, it's me, Jake. Dude, I need to ask you something. Do you remember Willow Creek? There was a long pause. What? Willow Creek, our town. We grew up there. Derek laughed nervously. Jake, what are you talking about? We've never lived anywhere with that name. My blood ran cold. That's not funny. I'm here now, or at least where the town should be, but it's gone. The silence on the other end was worse than any answer he could give. Then he mumbled something that made my stomach sink. Jake, I think you're remembering a place that never existed. My breath caught. No, that's wrong. I remember everything. Our school, the ice cream shop on Main Street, the fall festival. You were there too. I've never been to that place, Jake, and neither have you. The phone started to buzz. Jake, get out of there. Now. And then the line dropped. Jaw clenched. I tried to call again, but this time it only gave a non-existent number. My hands were shaking. This was impossible. Willow Creek was real, and I was going to prove it. So I walked into the woods, and that's when everything got worse. The beginning of the end. The woods were thick, the branches curling like fingers trying to grab me. Every step I took felt wrong, like I was trespassing on a place that didn't want to be discovered. The cold breeze grew stronger. The smell of wet earth was replaced by something wrong, a metallic, stale smell. I kept walking, and then I saw it. The first thing I noticed was a sign lying on the ground, covered in moss. Clearing the dirt, my heart nearly stopped. It was the sign for the entrance to town. Welcome to Willow Creek. My body went cold. I was about to scream in relief, but something stopped me. There was something behind the sign. Names engraved, and among them, at the bottom of the list, was mine. A chill ran down my spine. I had to get out of here. I turned to go back to the car, and the road was gone. The forest now surrounded me on all sides. Panic set in, and then something moved among the trees. Something tall, thin, its silhouette blurred in the fog. I wanted to run, but my feet felt stuck to the ground. The thing took a step forward. The dim moonlight illuminated a face that made my brain short-circuit. It was me, but not exactly. The face was familiar, but the eyes were wrong. Empty, unlit. My doppelganger smiled, then it whispered a single sentence. "Welcome back." The darkness swallowed me. The darkness around me wasn't normal. It was thick, like I'd fallen into a place that shouldn't exist. My lungs burned, my mind struggling to comprehend what had just happened. But then, my eyes adjusted, and I realized I was back. Willow Creek was there. The town sign glowed in the distance. The streetlights lit up the main street. I recognized everything: the diner on the corner, the school at the top of the hill, the convenience store where I'd bought candy as a kid. But something was wrong. The town felt empty. There was no one. No cars, no background conversations, no footsteps, just the wind carrying the scent of night. I started walking. My legs were still shaking, but I had to figure out what was happening. The first thing I did was go to the house where I grew up. Number 107 Maple Street. She was there, but the windows were dark. The curtains were drawn. The garden looked old, like it hadn't been tended to in years. My heart sank. I grabbed my cell phone and tried to call someone, anyone. No signal. Then I saw something that made my blood run cold. On the floor of the porch, there were footprints leading from inside the house. These footprints were identical to mine. I swallowed hard. I didn't want to go in, but I knew I had to. The forgotten house. I pushed the door open slowly. It creaked like it hadn't been opened in ages. The smell of aged wood and dust washed over me. The living room was just as I remembered it. The torn leather couch, the ash-filled fireplace, the old paintings on the walls. But something was different. The family portraits were wrong. Where a picture of me and my parents should have been, there was only a blurry version of me, as if someone had tried to erase my presence. The house was erasing me. My eyes scanned the room, and then I saw the basement door open. The only light in there came from an old radio on the kitchen table. It was on, but tuned to static. And then, the voice came from the radio. "You took a while to come back." My skin crawled. I turned quickly, but there was no one there. The radio continued. "You should never have left." I was suffocating. My legs wanted to run, but my body was trapped there. Then, a sound came from the basement. Footsteps, slow, paused, coming up the stairs. I didn't wait to see what it was. I ran out of the house, my heart hammering against my ribs. The hidden truth. When I got back to the street, I realized something had changed. The city was no longer empty. Figures appeared in the distance, on the sidewalks, at the intersections. But there was something wrong with them. Their bodies were still, rigid. Their faces had no eyes. My breath caught. They were all looking at me. Then one of them moved. He took a step forward, then another. His body bent in the wrong way, as if he were trying to remember how to walk. And then another, and another. They all started coming toward me. My feet reacted before my mind could. I ran. I passed the market, the school, the square, trying to find some way out. But every street I turned ended in nothing. The city had no way out anymore. She locked me in here, and then I heard it. The whisper, "You belong here." The voice was mine. I turned on my heel and saw it. My doppelganger was there. She was smiling. "You tried to run away, but this town, it will never let you go." My body started to tingle. My fingers went numb. My skin was turning transparent. I was fading away, as if Willow Creek was erasing me for good. I screamed, but it was too late. The town, that never existed, made me disappear with it. I've never liked driving at night. It wasn't a fear of the dark or anything like that, but rather a strange feeling that when the sun goes down, the road becomes a different place, something different, quieter, more empty. But that night, I had no choice. I had been traveling all day for work and was exhausted. My original plan was to stop at a motel before dark, but my late meeting had left me on the road much later than I wanted. Interstate 87 was completely deserted. No lights, no illuminated signs, nothing but the yellow glow of my headlights cutting through the endless darkness. The radio played a low tune, just to fill the suffocating silence. The GPS said it was still 3 hours until the next gas station. I could handle it. All I had to do was keep my eyes on the road, drink my cold coffee, and try not to think about the fact that I was completely alone in this vast expanse. Then the radio crackled. The sound came suddenly, loudly, making my heart skip a beat. I glanced at the display on the dashboard. The station I was listening to simply disappeared, replaced by a number that made no sense. 000.0. I frowned and tried to adjust the dial, but the hissing grew even louder. And then, a voice. "You're not alone." My fingers froze on the radio knob. I swallowed hard, feeling a shiver run down my spine. Slowly, I looked at the passenger seat, and that's when I saw it. A man was sitting there. My breath hitched, my muscles locked. I didn't hear the door open. I didn't feel the car rock. He was just there, a tall, thin man, wearing an old, worn suit. His eyes were hidden by the shadow of his hat, and his hands rested on his legs, still as stone. The radio hissed again. "Don't look at me. Just drive." My entire body tingled. Every instinct within me screamed to look directly at him, to make sure I wasn't imagining this. But I didn't. The road seemed to stretch out endlessly in front of me. My fingers were clammy on the steering wheel, my breath coming in short gasps. Who are you?" No answer. The radio was still emitting static, but now, in the background, there were whispers, faint, distant, and then I heard something that made my stomach sink. "You've been down this road before." Sweat trickled down my forehead. "What do you mean by that?" The man didn't move, but in the reflection in the passenger window, I saw it. His face wasn't there. There were no eyes, no nose, no mouth, just a deep, black void. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly. The radio crackled again. "You've been down this road before." The phrase repeated itself, and then something even worse happened. The car's headlights flickered. The road disappeared. What had once been a strip of clear asphalt was now a dark void, with no beginning or end. The car began to shake, the tires seeming to roll over an invisible ground. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. "What's happening?" I screamed, but the man next to me remained motionless. The radio crackled violently, and the voice whispered once more. "Welcome back." The car spun around. The dashboard flashed frantically, as if the system was collapsing, and then everything went black. I couldn't feel the car anymore. I couldn't feel the ground anymore. There was nothing, and a presence beside me that now smiled. Silence swallowed me. There was no road. There was no car. Just a dark void. No smell. No sound. No time. I was floating. Or maybe I was falling. My mind refused to accept what was happening. My body felt frozen, like I was trapped in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. Then the static returned. Low, whispering, like a thread of electricity running through the air around me. The radio was still there, even without the car, even without anything around me. And then the voice whispered again. "You've been down this road before." My lungs tightened. "What do you want from me?" The void answered. "You've been down this road before." The echo repeated, as if coming from every direction at once. My chest burned. My mind tried to remember something, but everything seemed distant, jumbled. And then, the road came back. The car appeared around me as if it had always been there. My hands were on the steering wheel, the headlights illuminating the dark asphalt. My body was shaking, my breath was short, panting. But then, I looked at the passenger seat. He was still there, the faceless man. My stomach turned. I wanted to get out of there, step on the gas and not look back. But something inside me knew. There was nowhere to run. The radio crackled again. This time, pay attention. My hands were sweating. Pay attention to what? The man finally moved. Slowly, he turned his head toward me. And then, it all came back. The memories. I had taken that road before, but not in this life, not in this time. The truth hit me like a punch in the chest. I died here, an accident, the car spinning on the wet road, the crash against the guardrail, the blood dripping down the dashboard. That was what the man wanted me to remember. I no longer belonged to the world of the living. My eyes widened. No, it can't be. The radio whispered one last time. Now you understand. The car began to slow down on its own. My feet no longer responded. The light from the headlights dimmed, as if it were going out. And then, everything made sense. I wasn't the driver. I was the passenger. I always had been. I always would be. The road had no end. I was doomed to redo it. Forever.